share this with you. So I was asked to focus on, because at IIPP I work on sort of public banking and those kinds of big scale sort of changes. So what I was asked to do was, I'm also a trustee of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland. So over the past year, particularly through lockdown, I've been doing some amazing interventions in Scotland where there is a big movement towards creating a wellbeing economy. It's almost like become one of the big grand challenges of Scotland in that sort of sense. So what are some of the examples of where that is embedded in communities, and and to focus on sort of diversity, empowering young people and around the missions that you have. So I'm largely going to be focused on those things. If I've got time, I'll shove in a little bit at the end about my mutual banking work. But I really wanted to sort of focus on these sorts of issues. So, as Mariana said, and as Pooja said, and as Dan said, the messiness of how we actually create when we have these grand challenges, these grand missions. It's like, how do we actually go about achieving those in such a way that there is grassroots support, that the community is brought alongside with us. So first, I'll just let you know what a wellbeing economy is. Sorry, I just have to click on that. So what is a wellbeing economy? In the shortest way that you can describe it would be social justice on a healthy planet. So it's quite broad in terms of that thinking, but the reason why it's called a well-being economy, it's not about, there's one version of well-being which is all about yoga and self-care and just like, aren't things nice for people? What we mean when we talk about well-being economy is this is about a systemic change in the purpose of the economy. So what is the point of the economy? Well, it's to provide for each and all of us. Like, we are the economy. It's not a thing that exists out there that happens to us. We are all part of it. And it has been designed in certain ways to create certain outcomes. And we believe that actually we can design the economy differently. So much like Dan's just gone through, and it's so fascinating about streets. They've been designed to create space for cars so people don't have to walk very far between their car and their home or the shop or whatever, but to actually have well-being streets, like you could call those new streets well-being, that help people do all of the different many things that they need to do in their lives. And so I guess, like, if we think about it in the mission framing, like, this is a grand challenge. Like, how do we make this kind of systemic transformation towards that? And it's about tackling root causes of problems. So there is a version of the economy which is about growing it at all costs, and then taking some of that money in taxes and redistributive measures and spending that on fixing the problems the economy creates in the first place, like environmental destruction, like poverty wages, and those kinds of things. And the idea is actually, let's design the system first time round so that it doesn't create those harms. So one example of how people have approached this, and also I need to say that wellbeing economy is a really broad church. Like, it's an alliance, so it's just people who get involved. It's really, big networking space for people to share ideas about these things. And one of those ideas is the donut, which I'm sure you'll have heard of. And one of my favorite geeky things is that lovely picture of Mariana and then Stephanie Kelton and then and Kate Raworth, all with their respective books about, women changing and transforming, what the purpose of the economy is, and showing a path through to that. And the donut is one, and I just think it's a great example of saying, what is the space for the economy? And it is making sure that there is a social floor that people do not drop under, and that there is also an ecological ceiling, and that this is the space where we should be designing what we're making things for. And so this involves getting the economy to do more of that heavy lifting. So we want to look at pre-distribution. So that's having wages that enable people to live the lives that they need to without having to have redistribution and tax credits to top that up. It's about economic democracy and providing more people with the means to participate and benefit from their participation in the economy. Paying attention to the foundational economy. If COVID's not taught us anything, it's got to be about how important care is, whether it's paid or unpaid, and paying attention to how important that is to all of our lives. Things like community wealth building, purpose-led businesses, like the rise of B Corps and co-ops and those kinds of things, and things like circular economy. So in terms of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, they did a big survey of all of their global members across the world. And, you know, because those things I just outlined are kind of like the geeky economic geeks version of what this means. But I would say this slide shows what does this mean actually for people on the ground, is that, you know, these are the principles that the sort of global network said that we need. So people need that connection, the fairness, participation, nature and dignity, and that's what the economy should provide, and so that we have to pay attention to that. So just want to say why participation matters, because I know that it's really central to what you're doing in the Commission, and you know, I'm probably just, you know, speaking to to people who agree with this. But for me, I think the really important point is that participation isn't just like a nice thing to have or something that we have to have now, and it's a hurdle that we have to overcome because everybody must be able to consult on stuff. What we're dealing with is massively complex problems. So, you know, in systems change thinking, you have the difference between your complicated problems and your simple problems and your complex problems. And complex problems mean that there is no one route to the answer. So this messiness is, you know, understanding that we're working with complex systems where it means that when we start to intervene in that system, it will provoke a response which will change what that system looks like. And so the only you know, appropriate response to that is to make sure that we have a much greater diversity of people who are involved, because the more people you have, the more data points you have, if you want to speak in that kind of language, the greater the chance that you're going to be able to pay attention to different elements of the system. Like, it's not possible for a person sitting in a council to understand the entirety of the complexity of the change that they're trying to create. So participation matters and diversity matters in terms of our understanding. Do we understand this problem? Do we understand it properly? Do we understand it from all the angles, so that we don't get nasty surprises or design something and put something in and we realize that actually it's going to be a massive failure, or it's going to cause loads of fear or provoke, you know, issues within the community. But we also need a diversity of ideas. Like, often, like, people who work in councils, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here, because you've created this commission to bring in a diversity of different people with different ideas to bring into that. But different ideas are what will help us innovate, right? Like, you know, when Mariana's talking about innovation, it's about, you know, and Mariana talks about the need for that groundswell for change. Like, you get that from having ideas that don't normally come into contact with each other and so that's a really important part of participation. And also, along with that, is problem solving skills. Like, often, you know, somebody sitting, you know, and I've worked in councils, like someone sitting in a council might not see a possible way that you can solve that, but if you are able to be bold and open enough to say, look, we would love to do this. So, like Georgia, before, when you said, okay, well, we're really worried about if you really like this building and then we can't actually use it for housing, which we need to do because it's part of our financial plan. Like, as long as you're upfront and honest, and then involve people in co-creating those solutions that you need, I think there's so much power in that. And I think that's the kind of participatory leadership that you know, we really need to work in these complex situations. And so, what are some examples of economic participatory policy making? So I think it comes down to two main things, which Pooja also talked about, like democratizing power. So where can the council actually just give up some power to the community? So I already see that you're looking at things like participatory budgeting and stuff like that, which is great. And Leith in Edinburgh, they've been doing this for a very long number of years, and that they're amending it and changing that because they found over the years that, yes, it was actually just the active middle class people who were getting involved, and so they actively went out there to speak to the communities who weren't getting involved with it. So it's always a continual messy process of trying, changing, realizing who's not in the room, and adapting what you're doing. So that's the kind of, I guess, that wooden frame approach that Dan was talking about. How do we do that with our economic policy as well? And one example I just want to talk about is, and I'll post the link in the chat, is we did a case study in Scotland about the Linwood Community Development Trust. So Linwood was a place that was, you know, in the 60s, it was a big industrial place. There was car factories, there was loads of industrial units, but predominantly this car factory. Bustling town. They then built the biggest shopping centre in Scotland there, and yes, I guess you can tell what happened is that declined severely in the 80s when the factory shut. The factory meant that 6,000 direct jobs were lost, but another 7,000 jobs were lost from the fall in income within the sort of wider supply chain in the area. Completely decimated the town. And what happened was the council at the time just said, right, how do we rescue this big shopping centre approach? And the community were like, we don't want everything to be built around the shopping centre. But no, they did the whole get the big Tesco in, get the, you know, the drive into the out of the centre sort of things in. And the community basically just, it didn't work. For a start, it didn't work. But a group of women, and you know, harness the power of the women in your community wherever you can. This group of women just said, you know what, this isn't good enough. The council aren't listening to us. So they set up the Linwood Community Development Trust with no money, and they just went out there and they just talked to their neighbours and they talked to the community about what they wanted. Skip on a few years, and the Community Development Trust has now got a turnover of over £2 million. They have set up a community-owned housing initiative, which has got it's got a football field, it's got a theatre, it's got a cafe. They've set up like a football kit washing social enterprise. Like, they are basically now just finding the opportunities that exist in their community. And so for yourselves in Camden, it's like, where and how do you create the conditions for people to find solutions to their own problems that link into these ideas of democratizing power and democratizing the economy? And how can you you know, and just to finish on that is our colleague Rowan, she's just like, where is the money? Like, show me the money for this real, you know, if you really value that community and that participation, like, where, like, you need to invest in that, and you need to invest in the people who will, you know, create that sort of democratic sort of groundswell for change. And I know that that's what you're trying to do here, but there's some really good examples. And the final thing I would end on is We All Global, we've been working on and just released this economic policy design guide, which is, again, it's very much built into the messiness of this place, but there are 5 main steps for people to follow. But it's not a linear, it's not a replacement of the new public management theory, but it's a provocation to the different ways that you can involve people in a deep, meaningful way within your community. And there is a policy makers network within that, where you can go and get ideas from not just people in the UK, but from people all across the world who are, you know, trying to do this work as well. So I would recommend, you know, they might be a good place to just sort of, a few of you to sort of link in to get some more ideas and cases. But I think that's my 10 minutes. I'll not go into the banking stuff per se, but just there are lots of different local purpose-driven banking systems in the UK, but the most exciting one, I think, is the mutual banking movement, which really has a mission at its heart to improve that local area, and that's kind of how it's set up. So I can speak about that another time, I think, but yeah, I'll stop.